In this lesson, we're going to add more detail to our simulation, like a tire breaking off. To do that, this tire is attached to the main body using this constraint. So if we disable that constraint, it will no longer be attached to that body. So at frame 59, you can have that enabled, and at frame 60, we can disable that and make sure we have a keyframe there. So let's go back here. Everything works, and then we get the explosion and the tire jumps off. I'll prefer the tire to roll a bit, so I might have to play with the timing quite a bit. And also, let's look at this tire. Now, because the center of mass of the tire is here, that's why I think it's struggling to stay upright. Is that even the right tire? I think it's this. Yeah. And since these are all the same tires, basically instances of each other, I can go into edit mode, push this a bit in, which will also change the center of mass for the tire, and I think that will make it likely to roll. Yeah, now that's much better. I can go to the constraint. Let's make sure that it's the right constraint. I think it's this. Change the timing a bit, play with the timing of when this breaks off to see if I can get the tire to roll. No, that's too late. Too early, maybe. Perfect. I like that. Let me also extend the timeline. Exactly what I want. We can do other things, like because this door, remember, is movable, we can also break that off. I'm not sure when should we do that. Maybe here. So just animate the constraint to go off at any frame you want, and let's see. Perfect. Okay, now we are running into an issue here. The center of mass for this door is here, so most of the mass is going here. So that's why you see that this is not behaving, the door is not behaving correctly. So that's going to be an issue. Now, we can't just move the center of mass to a different area, because then the pivot point will also change. And since we want the door to be rotated around here, let's try a different technique. We can use two constraints. I can add a cube here. Let me just scale it and give it a rigid body. And this is going to replace the pivot point. Since we want the center of mass of this door to be somewhere here, we can weld, using a fixed constraint, weld this cube to the door so that it's treated as the same object, and then use the pivot point of this as a hinge. So to do that, we're going to add another constraint, and I can even just add the constraint directly to this. So rigid body constraint, attach the door to the cube. So if you hit play, you can see that nothing has changed. The hinge still works, but now we can change this hinge to be connected to this object, this cube, instead of the door directly. So I can remove this to this. And I can now reset the origin just like that. And just to recap, what we have done is this door originally was welded or was hinged directly to the car body, and because our pivot point was here, it was giving us a behavior we didn't want. I changed the pivot point to go to the middle, and that will also make the door rotate around the pivot point, which is the center of the door, which is something we don't want. So what I did is add this object that is welded onto the car, and since the pivot point of this cube is here, I can just now constrain or hinge this to the car body, keeping the center of mass here while the hinge here. And this object can just move it inside the car, so that is not visible. So now when we simulate, you can see we are running into a new problem. The door immediately opens, and the reason for that is because the door and the main car body are both rigid bodies that are intersecting. When two bodies are intersecting in Blender, the rigid body system just pushes them apart so that they are not intersecting anymore, and that's what we are seeing here. And because the door is still connected to the car body through the hinge, it's just swinging open like you're seeing. Now, to fix this, we need to disable the collisions until we break the constraint so that the door can open when we want it to open. Now, usually when you constrain or connect two objects, two rigid body objects together using a constraint, the collisions between those two objects are disabled by default. That's why you see that the bonnet, while it is intersecting with the car body, is not being pushed open like we're seeing with the door. That's because the constraint that is connecting the two bodies is disabling the collisions by default. And since the door and the main car body are not connected directly by a constraint, we don't have the collisions between the two bodies disabled. The car door is connected to the cube with a constraint. That's why you don't see any collisions between those two objects. And then it's the cube that is connected to the main body with a hinge constraint. That's why you don't see collisions between the cube and the main car body. But there isn't a direct connection between the car body and the door. So we need to disable the collisions ourselves. So let's do that in the next lesson.